You're a failure and not my biological child, so I forgot to prepare your seat, my dad announced, forcing me to eat in the kitchen at his birthday party. The room erupted in laughter. I walked up, quietly placed my gift on the table, just a single sheet of paper. Then I ripped it to pieces right in front of him. When he pieced it together, his face turned white. I'm Graham Martin. I'm 33 years old, and at my own adoptive father's 65th birthday party, he called me a failure and announced he was cutting me out of his will in front of a room full of people. Before I tell you about the gift I gave him right after that, a gift he would regret for the rest of his life, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Alright, so picture this. A stuffy, overcrowded living room in a house in Fort Worth that I once forced myself to call home. The air is thick with the competing scents of my adoptive mother's pot roast and the cloying, expensive perfume of her friends. It's my father, Robert's 65th birthday, and the room is a sea of unfamiliar faces and ghosts from my past. His golf buddies, all red-faced and loud from too much scotch. Neighbors who used to watch me mow the lawn and probably thought I was the hired help. And my family. The word feels foreign on my tongue. The people I am biologically unrelated to but contractually obligated to call family. I hadn't set foot in this house or spoken a single word to any of them in 11 years. 11 years of silence, of building a life from scratch, of proving to myself, if no one else, that I was not the person they told me I was. But I came back. One last time. A final, foolish attempt to close a door that should have been sealed shut a decade ago. It was, I see now with perfect clarity, a monumental mistake. I'm standing near the back, by a wilting ficus tree, a ghost at my own father's feast. My presence is a stone dropped into a placid pond, ripples of awkwardness spreading through the room. I can feel their eyes on me, curious, pitying, judging. From across the room, my brother James, the golden child, catches my eye. He doesn't smile. He smirks. It's a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. The look of a victor who sees a long-defeated foe crawl back onto the battlefield. My sister, Lily, stands beside him, a shadow in his light. She nervously adjusts the collar of her dress, her gaze fixed on the floor. She won't look at me. She never could. That's when it happens. The sharp, piercing clink of a fork against a crystal wine glass. The sound cuts through the dull roar of conversation like a gunshot. My father, Robert Harper, stands in the center of the room, his chest puffed out, his face flushed with wine and a lifetime of unchallenged self-importance. Attention, everyone, a moment of your time. He booms, his voice accustomed to being obeyed. He launches into a rambling speech, thanking everyone for their attendance, for the embarrassingly expensive gifts piled on a nearby table. Then, his eyes, small and hard like pebbles, land on me. A slow, reptilian smile spreads across his face. It's the smile of a predator that has just cornered its prey. I see my adopted son, Graham, decided to grace us with his presence. He says, elongating the word adopted as if it were a stain, a piece of filth he was forced to acknowledge. The room, which had been buzzing with low chatter, falls deathly silent. Some of you know the story, he continues, addressing the crowd as if I weren't there. Ellen and I, in our generosity, took him in as a boy. We did our best. We gave him a roof over his head, food on the table. But as they say, you can't change what's in the blood. My stomach clenches into a tight, cold knot. I knew this was coming. This was the reason I was summoned. I was not a guest. I was the evening's entertainment, the sacrificial lamb. He's always been a bit of a, well, there's no polite way to say it, a failure. Robert announces, his voice dripping with a casual, practiced disdain. So, Graham, he says, finally addressing me directly. Since you're not really my child and frankly you're a lifelong disappointment, I seem to have forgotten to prepare a seat for you at the dinner table. You can eat in the kitchen if you'd like. A few people gasp, a flicker of decency in a sea of complicity. But then, a single, sharp bark of laughter erupts. It's James. Of course, it's James. His laugh is the signal, the permission slip. It spreads through the room, a wave of sneering, tittering mockery washing over me. The kitchen. For a decade and a half, the kitchen was my designated place of shame. And here I was, at 33 years old, a man who ran a multi-million-dollar company, being sent back to the kitchen like a dog who had misbehaved. But Robert, my father, wasn't finished. He was enjoying himself too much. He raised his hand for silence. And one more thing while we're clearing the air for good. I've had a meeting with my lawyer just last week. I've updated my will. Everything, and I mean every last cent, will be divided between my real children, James and Lily. He looks right at me, his eyes gleaming with a final, crushing malice. You get nothing, because you are nothing to me. The laughter is louder this time, more confident. My own father had just publicly disowned, humiliated, and disinherited me in the same breath. My execution was complete. I don't say a word. I let my face remain a blank canvas, refusing to give them the emotional reaction they craved. I simply nod slowly, a silent acknowledgement of his declaration. Then I start walking. My legs feel steady, my purpose clear. I am not walking to the kitchen. I am not walking out the door. Not yet. I walk straight to the gift table, a shrine to my father's ego. And there it sits, among the bottles of scotch and leather-bound books. A large, pristine manila envelope. My gift. I pick it up. The room falls silent again. Every eye fixed on me, waiting. They expect tears. They expect rage. They expect me to make a scene. I do none of those things. I turn to face my father, holding the heavy envelope in my hand. I let my eyes drift from his face, to my mother's, to my brother's. I see the confusion, the arrogance, and a flicker of something else in their eyes. Greed. This, I say, my voice low and clear, cutting through the suffocating silence, was for you. This was your gift. But I've decided, you don't deserve it. I look him straight in the eye, a man I will no longer call father. Then, without another word, I turn my back on all of them and walk out the front door, leaving the envelope on the table. It sits there, a silent, powerful testament to what they had just thrown away. The weight of 3 decades, of trying, of hoping, of hurting, finally, blessedly, lifted from my shoulders. It was over. They had fired their final shot. They just didn't know I had come armed with a cannon. To understand the profound, soul-deep relief I felt walking out that door, you have to understand the 30 years that came before it. You have to understand what it's like to be a ghost in your own life. I know I wasn't their blood. They made sure, on a near-daily basis, that I never forgot it. I was 3 years old when Robert and Ellen Harper adopted me from the St. Jude's Home for Children in Fort Worth. For a little while, in the beginning, it was a dream. I have these hazy, sun-drenched memories of being lifted up onto Robert's shoulders, of Ellen singing me to sleep. I remember a Christmas morning, I must have been 5, when they gave me a bright red bicycle. Robert spent the whole afternoon teaching me how to ride it, jogging alongside me on the sidewalk, his hand steady on the back of the seat. For a brief, shining period, I was their son. I thought I had found my forever home. Then, when I was 6, Ellen gave birth to the twins, James and Lily, their own flesh and blood, the golden children. And overnight, it was like a switch was flipped. A light went out. The warmth that had surrounded me vanished, redirected entirely toward the 2 new cribs in the nursery. Suddenly, I wasn't their son anymore. I was an obligation, an afterthought. I was the adopted one. The first time the new reality slapped me in the face, I was 8 years old. It's a memory burned into my mind with the precision of a laser. I came running home from school, my heart thumping with pride, clutching a math test in my hand. A huge, looping A+ was circled in bright red ink at the top. It was the best grade in the class. I burst into the living room, ready to present my trophy. My parents were on the floor, cooing and clucking over a piece of construction paper James was holding. It was a crude crayon drawing of a lopsided house with 4 stick figures. The sun was just a yellow scribble in the corner. "Look, Mom! Dad!" I exclaimed, my voice filled with 8-year-old excitement. holding out my test paper like an offering. I got an A+. Mrs. Davison said I was a math whiz. Robert glanced at it, his eyes barely registering the grade. That's nice, son, he said, his attention already snapping back to James. Ellen, look at this. Our boy is a regular Picasso. This is incredible. We have to get this framed. Ellen beamed. Oh, Robert, you're right. It's a masterpiece. James puffed out his little chest, preening under the praise. They hung James's drawing in a gaudy, gold-painted frame right on the mantelpiece, the place of honor above the fireplace. My A+ test paper, my trophy, ended up in the kitchen trash can that night. I saw its red-inked victory peeking out from under a pile of coffee grounds when I took out the garbage. Sounds like such a small thing, I know. A trivial childhood slight. But it wasn't. It was the cornerstone. It was the first brick in a wall they would spend the next decade building between me and them. From that day on, the rules were clear. Their children's smallest, most mundane achievements were to be celebrated with cake and praise and framed artwork. Mine, no matter how significant, were to be met with polite, dismissive indifference. I was a ghost in my own home, a living, breathing reminder that I wasn't theirs. The holidays became annual rituals of humiliation. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, it was always the same story. The house would be filled with extended family, the dining table groaning under the weight of turkey and ham and pies. The good china would be brought out. The silverware would gleam under the chandelier. And I would be in the kitchen. There's just not enough room at the table, Graham. Ellen would say every single year, her voice full of false regret, her eyes refusing to meet mine. You understand, don't you? Of course I understood. I understood that I was less than. So I would sit on a rickety wooden stool in the kitchen, eating my holiday dinner off a chipped stoneware plate, listening to the muffled sounds of my family laughing and sharing stories in the next room. The wall was not just emotional. It was physical. They were in there together. I was out here alone. Lily, my sister, was the only one who seemed to possess a conscience. She was quieter than James, with a deep-seated kindness in her eyes that the rest of them lacked. Sometimes, during those lonely holiday meals, she'd sneak into the kitchen. She wouldn't say much. She'd just press a warm dinner roll or a slice of still-warm apple pie into my hand, her small fingers brushing against mine. She'd whisper, "I'm sorry, Graham." Her eyes full of a sorrow she was too afraid to voice, before scurrying back to the warmth and light of the dining room. Her small acts of rebellion were like tiny candles in a vast, echoing darkness, but they weren't enough to make me feel like I belonged. They only highlighted how much I didn't. School became my sanctuary, my escape. If I couldn't earn their love, then damn it, I would earn respect somewhere else. I poured every ounce of my energy into my studies. I wasn't just smart. I was driven by a desperate, burning need to prove my worth. I joined the debate team, the mathletes, the science club. I found a friend, my first and only real friend, Carlos. He was a lanky, brilliant tech nerd with glasses thicker than a bottle cap and a sarcastic sense of humor that kept me sane. We were both outcasts, and we bonded over our shared love of taking things apart to see how they worked. We spent our weekends in his garage, building computers from spare parts and dreaming of a future far away from Fort Worth. He never once asked about my family. He just saw me. He was the first person who ever did. One afternoon, during my sophomore year of high school, Carlos and I were hiding out in the library, supposedly studying for a chemistry test but actually trying to code a rudimentary video game on the school's ancient computers. I got up to get a book and walked past a table where James was holding court with his pack of jock friends. He was the school's star quarterback, popular, handsome, the polar opposite of me in every way. And he was talking about me. "Yeah, it's a real shame," James said, his voice oozing a fake, sanctimonious sympathy. "My parents had to send my adopted brother to a different school next year. He's been having issues, anger problems, getting into trouble with the law. They're hoping a new environment will straighten him out." His friends nodded sagely, their faces full of pity for poor, heroic James, burdened with such a troubled brother. My blood ran cold, then hot with a silent, impotent rage. He was lying. The truth was, I had just won a full academic scholarship to the Texas Academy of Mathematics and Science, a prestigious boarding school for gifted kids. It was my ticket out. I wasn't in trouble. I was succeeding beyond anyone's expectations. But in the narrative James spun for the world, he was the good son, the hero, and I was the charity case, the delinquent, the problem child he had to endure. He wasn't just basking in the sunlight of their favoritism. He was actively, maliciously trying to cast a shadow over my tiny patch of sun. Years passed like that, a long, slow grind of being invisible at home and working twice as hard as everyone else at school. I graduated from the academy at the top of my class. I left for college without so much as a good luck from Robert or Ellen. And then, 5 years into my self-imposed exile, the phone rang. It was my mother. It was the first time I'd heard her voice since I'd left for school. "Graham," she said. Her voice, usually so strong and assertive, was thin and frail, like a dry leaf. It's your mother." I clenched the phone, my knuckles turning white. "What do you want, Ellen?" I haven't been well, Graham," she whispered, and I heard a faint, shaky breath on the other end. "The doctor, he says it's my heart. It's not good. And I was lying here thinking about you. I miss my son. My heart, the one I had so carefully encased in scar tissue, felt a stupid, treacherous pang. Her heart? She missed me? The logical part of my brain, the part that had survived 30 years of their emotional warfare, was screaming at me. It's a trap. It's a manipulation. Hang up. But another part, a much smaller, much more foolish part. The little boy who still remembered the feel of his father's hand on his bicycle seat, whispered, what if she means it? What if this time is different? That phone call was a seed. A tiny, poisonous seed of hope planted in the barren soil of my heart. It was the reason, months later, I would even consider going back. Maybe, just maybe, I could go back and show them the man I had become. And maybe, finally, they would see me. But first, there was graduation. I got my acceptance letter to the University of Texas at Austin's prestigious engineering program, with a full scholarship that covered everything. I was ecstatic. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for. In a moment of weakness, I called home to tell them the news. Robert answered. "I got a full ride to UT's engineering school," I said, unable to keep the tremor of pride out of my voice. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the television droning in the background. Then, Robert's cold, flat voice came through the receiver. "Good for you. You're on your own now. Don't come asking us for a dime." Click. He hung up. I stood there in my cramped dorm room, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even surprised. The strange thing was I felt free. He had cut the last, frayed thread that connected me to them. As I packed my bags for Austin, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not just survive. I would succeed on a scale they couldn't comprehend. I would build a life so full, a world so bright, that they would never, ever be able to ignore me again. College was a 4-year lesson in exhaustion. The scholarship was my lifeline, covering tuition and fees, but that was it. For rent in a shoebox apartment I shared with 2 other guys, for textbooks that cost a fortune, for the cheap instant ramen that became my primary food group, I was completely on my own. I became a creature of the night, working 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs. From midnight to 4 a.m., I was a janitor at the campus library. I remember the surreal quiet of those hours, the only sound the squeak of my mop and the hum of the fluorescent lights. I'd be wiping down tables where, just hours earlier, students with trust funds and carefree smiles had been studying. They'd go home to comfortable beds, while I'd catch an hour of sleep on a lumpy couch before my 8 a.m. thermodynamics class. I also worked the late shift at a 24-hour diner, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and grease. It was a grind, a relentless, soul-crushing cycle of work and study. But every dollar I earned, every A I scraped for on an exam, felt like a small act of defiance. It was a brick I was laying in the foundation of my new life, a life they had no part in. It was in a senior-level computer science seminar that my life took a sharp, unexpected turn. The class was taught by Professor Alistair Miller, A brilliant, wildly eccentric man with a shock of white hair and a mind that moved at 1,000 miles an hour. He saw something in me that no one else had, not even me. He saw past my worn-out jeans and the perpetual tired look in my eyes. He saw my mind. "Martin," he barked at me one day after I'd presented a project. "Your code is elegant. It's got a poetry to it. Most of these blockheads," he waved a dismissive hand at the empty classroom, "just solve the problem in front of them. You anticipate the next 5 problems. What in God's name do you plan to do with a brain like that?" No one had ever asked me that before. I mumbled something non-committal about getting a corporate job at IBM or Microsoft. He scoffed, a loud, derisive sound. "Don't work for the man, Martin. Be the man. They'll grind that poetry right out of you. You have the vision for something bigger." He became my mentor, my champion. He pushed me, challenged me, and loaned me books from his personal library. He was the one who first ignited the spark in me for energy optimization software. The idea was simple in concept but revolutionary in its potential application. Create an intelligent, learning system that could interface with a large building's HVAC, lighting, and power grids to dramatically reduce energy waste. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about creating a more sustainable future. It was a complex, beautiful puzzle, and I became obsessed with solving it. After graduation, the first person I called was Carlos. He'd also graduated with a degree in software engineering and was working a boring but well-paying job for a defense contractor. I pitched him my idea over greasy burgers at the same diner we used to frequent in high school. "So, let me get this straight," he said, pushing his thick glasses up his nose as he meticulously wiped ketchup off his fingers. "You want to build a brain for buildings? A benevolent AI that stops them from being energy-guzzling monsters." "Exactly," I said, my voice thrumming with an energy that had nothing to do with the 3 cups of coffee I'd had. "A system that learns, adapts, and makes every single watt of energy count. We could change the world, Carlos." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at a half-eaten French fry. Then he looked up at me, and a slow grin spread across his face. "Dude, I am so in. My current job is soul-crushing. When do we start?" We started in his parents' garage. It was a complete cliché, I know. 2 nerds, a couple of souped-up computers we built ourselves, and a giant whiteboard covered in complex algorithms and chicken scratch notes. We lived on cheap pizza, stale coffee, and the sheer, unadulterated excitement of creation. We coded for 18, sometimes 20 hours a day, fueled by the absolute certainty that we were onto something huge. We called our fledgling company OptiNRG. But belief, as we quickly learned, doesn't pay the server bills. We needed funding. We polished our resumes, put on our only suits. Mine was a size too big, a relic from a thrift store, and started making the rounds. The rejections were fast and brutal. We were laughed out of more sleek, minimalist boardrooms than I can count. "Too ambitious. The market's not ready. Come back when you have a fully working prototype and a multi-million-dollar contract." They wanted a sure thing, and we were 2 guys in a garage. Worse than the rejections, though, was the sabotage. We managed to land a meeting with a mid-level venture capital firm run by a slick, predatory shark named Mark Jensen. He feigned immense interest, asking a string of highly specific technical questions. We left the meeting feeling hopeful. 2 weeks later, Carlos called me, his voice tight with fury. "You are not going to believe this," he spat. He sent me a link to a tech blog. The headline read, "Jensen VC announces groundbreaking new, smart building initiative." The article detailed our idea, our architecture, almost word for word, attributed to an in-house development team at Jensen's firm. The snake was trying to steal our concept and beat us to market. "I'll kill him," Carlos yelled through the phone. "I'll go down there and—" "No," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. A cold, hard anger settled in my gut. "We're not going to kill him. We're going to beat him. We're going to bury him." The incident taught me a crucial lesson. The business world wasn't just indifferent. It was actively hostile. It was a shark tank, and if you weren't careful, you'd get eaten alive. You had to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than the competition. We went into lockdown, working around the clock with a renewed, vengeful fury. We finished our prototype in 6 weeks, a timeline that should have been impossible. We bypassed the piranhas like Jensen and went straight for the apex predator. We used a university connection from Professor Miller to secure a meeting with a legendary tech investor in Austin, a woman so notoriously tough she was known as the Executioner. We walked into a gleaming high-rise office on the 50th floor, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air was thin up there. We had one shot. I laid out the vision, the technology, the 5-year plan. Carlos, his hands surprisingly steady, ran the live demo on a massive screen. The Executioner watched us without a single flicker of expression on her face. When we finished, she was silent for a full minute. A minute that stretched into an eternity. I was sure we'd blown it. Then she leaned forward, her eyes pinning me to my seat. "How much do you need?" We walked out of that building with a check for $1 million. I remember stopping on the sidewalk outside, looking at all those zeros, and feeling not just elation, but a profound, earth-shaking sense of validation. We had done it. The boy from the kitchen, the failure, the disappointment, was on his way. The next few years were a whirlwind. Erupted NRG grew at an explosive rate. That 1 million in seed money turned into 10, then 50. Our software, the brain for buildings, was installed in corporate headquarters, university campuses, and government buildings all across the country. We were a bona fide success story. One evening, years later, Carlos and I were working late in our own gleaming high-rise office, looking over the company's quarterly financials. Our valuation had just crossed the $100 million mark. "We need to give back," I said, the thought surfacing fully formed. "What do you mean?" Carlos asked, leaning back in his chair. "I want to set up a foundation, a real one, with serious money behind it, to help kids in the foster care system. Kids who start out with nothing like I did." Carlos smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "I love it, man. That's a fantastic idea. How much are we talking?" "Let's start with a $4 million endowment," I said. The number felt right. It was substantial. It was a number that could change thousands of lives. "That's incredible, Graham," Carlos said, his voice full of sincere admiration. "When do you want to announce it?" "Soon," I said, my gaze drifting out the window to the sprawling city lights below. "But first, there's something I have to do. A piece of old business I need to settle. A chapter 1 need to close for good." A few days later, as if summoned by my thoughts, a crisp, cream-colored envelope arrived at my office. It was thick, expensive paper. The return address was my old house in Fort Worth. It was an invitation. "Robert Harper requests the pleasure of your company at his 65th birthday celebration." It was sent as a formality, I was sure. A box to be checked so they could tell their friends they had reached out. But coming so soon after my mother's manipulative, lying phone call, it felt like something else. Felt like destiny. Carlos saw it on my desk. "You're not actually going to go, are you?" he asked, his skepticism practically a third person in the room. "You know it's a trap, right? They just want something from you." "I know," I said, my voice firm, my decision made. "But I'm not going for them, Carlos. I'm going for me." "What are you going to do?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I looked at him, a plan that had been slowly crystallizing in the back of my mind for years finally snapping into sharp, perfect focus. A plan that was cold, calculated, and, I thought, perfectly poetically just, "I'm going to go to that party," I said, "and I'm going to give my father the gift he's always deserved. And I'm going to end this once and for all." The drive from my sleek, minimalist downtown Austin apartment to the suffocatingly traditional suburbs of Fort Worth felt like traveling through a time warp. Every mile closer to my old house, the memories grew louder, more insistent. The oak trees lining the streets, now thicker and older, seemed to whisper the same old taunts. The tidy lawns and two-car garages all felt like a judgment. This was the world I had escaped, the world that had never wanted me. And I was driving right back into it. I parked my car, a silent electric sedan that was worth more than the down payment on this entire house. a street away. I didn't want them to see it. This wasn't about flaunting wealth. It was about settling a debt. I walked up the familiar concrete driveway, the cracks filled with weeds, just like they always were. As I stepped over the threshold, the chill hit me. It wasn't the aggressive blast of the air conditioning. It was the atmosphere. It was the thick, unbreathable air of a place built on secrets and resentment. James, my brother, saw me first. The smirk that spread across his face was a slow, oily thing. It was a mixture of genuine surprise and deep, satisfying contempt. Well, he drawled, his voice loud enough for a cluster of nearby guests to turn and stare. Look what the cat dragged in. Decided to crawl back from whatever hole you've been hiding in. Did you? I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. I just gave him a flat, emotionless look and moved past him, my eyes scanning the room for my mother. And there she was, Ellen. She wasn't frail. She wasn't pale. She wasn't lying in bed with a weak heart. She was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of crisp white wine, laughing heartily at something one of her friends had said. She looked perfectly, vibrantly healthy. The heart condition was a complete and utter fabrication. The pathetic, whispery phone call, the "I miss my son." It was all a lie, a calculated, manipulative performance designed to do exactly what it had done. Lure me back into their orbit. Our eyes met across the room. I saw a flicker of panic in hers, the deer in the headlights look of someone caught in a lie. But it was quickly replaced by a familiar defensiveness. She had the audacity to look away first, turning her back to me to refresh her drink. I gripped the cool metal of my phone in my pocket. The rage I expected to feel wasn't there. In its place was a profound, liberating clarity. There was no hope here. There never had been. This wasn't a family I needed to mend. It was a business relationship I needed to terminate. I found a spot against the far wall, a fly on the wall, a ghost at the feast. I became an observer, a strategist surveying the battlefield before the engagement. I saw my sister, Lily. She saw me, too, and a look of such deep, painful conflict washed over her features that it was almost hard to watch. She looked like she wanted to run over to me, or maybe run out of the room. Instead, she did neither. She froze for a moment, then quickly turned away, busying herself with meticulously arranging napkins on a side table. She was still a prisoner here, a willing witness trapped in her own terrified silence. That's when I overheard it. The final piece of the puzzle I didn't even know I was missing. My father, Robert, was talking to James in a corner, their backs mostly to me. They thought they were being discreet. But I had spent a lifetime learning how to listen from the sidelines. Just be nice to him for one night, for God's sake, Robert muttered, his voice a low, conspiratorial grumble. Don't scare him off. I did some digging. His little software company isn't so little anymore. They're making real money. There's no harm in seeing what we can get out of him before we kick him to the curb for good. James chuckled, a low, greedy sound. Whatever you say, Dad. Time to milk the fatted calf. Milk the fatted calf. That's all I was. An asset to be exploited. An opportunity. A potential source of cash. The last, stubborn, microscopic shred of any sentimental attachment I might have harbored for these people disintegrated in that moment. It was vaporized, replaced by an icy, diamond-hard calm. My plan, which had felt cold and clinical before, now felt entirely righteously justified. This wasn't about revenge. It was a hostile takeover. They had shown their hand, and it was a pathetic, grasping, greedy one. Now it was time for me to show them mine. I took a slow, deep breath, centering myself. The chatter, the schmaltzy music, the clinking glasses. It all faded into a dull, distant roar. I was in the eye of the storm, a place of absolute stillness and perfect clarity. I knew exactly what was going to happen next because I was the one who was going to make it happen. I was no longer a pawn in their game. I was the one controlling the board. And right on cue, as if summoned by my very thoughts, I saw Robert moving to the center of the room, picking up a fork and tapping it against his crystal wine glass. The sharp, piercing sound sliced through the noise, a conductor calling his orchestra to attention. "Friends, family," he called out, a broad, confident, predatory smile plastered on his face. "If I could have your attention for a moment, please." He began his speech, and as he did, his eyes locked onto mine across the crowded room. There was no warmth, no fatherly pride, not even simple recognition. Just the cold, calculating look of a man about to deliver a killing blow, utterly oblivious to the fact that his intended victim was holding a loaded gun. Robert cleared his throat, his chest puffed out, basking in the glow of the 50 pairs of eyes fixed upon him. He was in his element. This was his court, and he was the king. "It warms my old heart to see all of you here," he began, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. He spoke of his life, his work at the insurance firm, his championships at the golf club, a litany of mundane achievements polished to a high shine by his own ego. And then he turned his attention to his legacy. "A man's true legacy," he declared, placing a heavy, proprietary hand on James's shoulder, "is his family. My son, James, who has always made me proud, following in my footsteps, and my beautiful daughter, Lily, the light of my life." He paused, a master of dramatic timing, letting the weight of his words settle. Then his gaze, like the beam of a spotlight, swung across the room and landed on me. This was the moment he had been building towards. This was the grand finale. "And of course," he said, the name dripping from his tongue like something unpleasant, "we have Graham." He let the name hang there for a moment, an oddity, an intruder. "As most of you know, Ellen and I, in our generosity, took Graham in. We gave him a home. We gave him our name. We did our duty as good Christians." He emphasized the word duty, framing his entire relationship with me as a burdensome chore he had nobly performed. "But blood," he said, his voice hardening, his folksy charm evaporating to reveal the granite underneath, "is blood. And I feel, at this stage in my life, it's time to be honest. Brutally honest." He looked at me. "Graham, you have been a constant, unrelenting disappointment. You walked out on this family 11 years ago, and frankly, we have thrived in your absence." The room was utterly, suffocatingly silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. The air crackled with a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. "So, in the interest of absolute clarity," Robert said, his smile twisting into a vicious, triumphant sneer, "I want to make a public declaration. I have instructed my lawyer, who is here with us tonight, hello, Bill, to amend my last will and testament. Everything I have built, this house, my savings, my stock portfolio, will be divided equally between my 2 biological children, James and Lily." He looked directly at me, his eyes gleaming with a lifetime of stored-up malice. "You, Graham, will receive nothing, not a single red cent, because you are nothing to this family." A wave of shock rippled through the guests, followed by a flurry of nervous coughs and rustling fabric. James, however, couldn't contain his glee. He let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It was a cruel, ugly sound. A few of Robert's sycophantic golf buddies, emboldened by James, joined in. Soon, the sound of their condescending laughter filled the room, a chorus of ridicule aimed directly at my heart. I didn't flinch. I let them have their moment. I let them spew their venom. I let the full weight of their ugliness settle over the room. When the last snicker had died down, I pushed myself off the wall and began to walk forward. Every eye in the room followed my slow, deliberate procession. The silence was absolute once more. I walked past Robert, past a stunned-looking Lily, past a smirking James, and stopped at the gift table. I picked up the heavy manila envelope. "You're right, Robert," I said, my voice perfectly even and calm. The use of his first name was a small, sharp jab. I saw him stiffen. "You absolutely should be honest." I turned to face the room, my back to my so-called family. For weeks, I wondered what to get a man like my father for his 65th birthday. It's a real challenge. What do you give the man who has everything he wants, and who has given you absolutely nothing you needed? I held up the envelope, So I decided to forget the usual bottle of scotch. I decided to make him an offer. A business proposal, you could say. I walked over to him, into the circle of his stunned silence, and pulled the first document from the envelope. It was a thick, professionally drafted contract, bound in a neat blue cover. My company, Erupted, I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the room, formally offers to purchase this house and the property it sits on from you, not for its current market value, but for the sum of $2 million. Gasps, sharp and audible, echoed through the room. 2 million. The house was worth maybe a quarter of that on a good day. Robert's eyes, which had been small and hard, were suddenly wide, the arrogance in them momentarily extinguished by sheer, naked greed. James, standing behind him, took a half-step forward, his jaw slack with disbelief. But that's not all, I continued, my voice as level and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Upon completion of the sale as a signing bonus, my company would also gift you, free and clear, the deed to a $4 million, custom-built beachfront villa in Santa Barbara, California. I pulled out the second document from the envelope. It wasn't a document at all. It was a glossy, professionally designed architectural brochure for the villa, complete with stunning, full-color photos of sweeping ocean views, an infinity pool, and a state-of-the-art kitchen. I let it drop onto the polished mahogany coffee table. It landed with a soft, expensive thud. The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers. $6 million. The number was an absurdity. It was a fantasy. Robert stared at the documents, his hands trembling slightly. Ellen's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes fixated on the picture of the oceanfront pool. James looked like he'd been physically struck. This wasn't a gift. It was a winning lottery ticket. It was a new life, delivered on a silver platter. I let them process it for a moment, letting their raw, undisguised greed build to a fever pitch. I could practically see the calculations flashing behind Robert's eyes. The new cars, the exotic travel, the elevated status at the country club. He looked up at me, a new, fawning, desperate respect dawning in his gaze. I slid the contract and a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen across the table toward him. All you have to do is sign. His hand darted out, snatching the pen like a starving man grabbing a piece of bread. He didn't read a word. He didn't hesitate. He was ready to sign away a lifetime of his self-proclaimed principles for a fat paycheck. As the tip of the pen touched the signature line, I spoke again. My voice was no longer calm. It was ice. There is, however, one small condition. A non-negotiable clause. You'll find it on page 5, section 3. He looked up. His eyes narrowed with a flicker of suspicion. The clause states, I said, reciting the words my lawyers and I had so carefully crafted, that this offer, in its entirety, is contingent upon it being accepted by a party who has not, either publicly or privately, disavowed his legal or moral familial connection to the co-signer Graham Martin. I let the dense legal jargon hang in the air for a pregnant second before translating it into plain English for him. It means, I said, leaning in slightly, that this $6 million offer was only valid before you stood up in front of all these people and told this entire room that I was not your son and that I was nothing to you. The color drained from Robert's face. It was as if someone had pulled a plug and all the life and arrogance had gushed out of him. The pen fell from his nerveless fingers and clattered onto the table. Your speech, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. The one where you called me a failure and disinherited me. It just cost you $6 million. Dead silence. The kind of silence that is so heavy and so absolute that it feels like you're at the bottom of the ocean. But I wasn't finished. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out one more document. So, this money, I said, holding it up for all to see. The $2 million for the house and the $4 million for the villa will not be going to you. Instead, as of this moment, it becomes the initial seed endowment for the Erupted Foundation. I looked around the room, at the stunned, pale faces of his friends and neighbors. A foundation dedicated to providing resources, scholarships, and stable homes for orphaned and abandoned children. Kids who, like me, were told they were nothing. We're going to make sure they know they are everything. I placed the Foundation's charter on top of the now useless $6 million contract. My gift, the ultimate gift. I had taken their ugliness, their greed, their hate, and I had alchemized it into hope for hundreds of children they would never know. I looked at Robert. His face was a grotesque mask of horror, of disbelief, and of a dawning, soul-crushing regret that was biblical in its scope. James was staring at his father, his expression one of pure, murderous fury. I had not only taken away the money, I had shown him and everyone else exactly whose fault it was. I had won. Not by shouting, not by crying, not by begging for their love. I had won by using their own character flaws as the weapon of their own destruction. I didn't linger to watch the empire crumble. My part in this Greek tragedy was over. I had delivered the climax, and now it was time for the exodus. I turned my back on the frozen tableau of my family's self-destruction and walked toward the door. The spell of stunned silence was finally broken. As I passed, a few of the guests, men and women whose names I didn't know, stepped forward. One of them, a distinguished-looking older man with kind eyes, put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Young man," he said, his voice low but firm, so only I could hear. That was the most dignified and masterful display of justice I have ever had the privilege to witness. He shook my hand, a firm, respectful grip. Another woman, one of Ellen's friends, simply met my gaze and nodded, her eyes full of a strange, fierce admiration. They weren't pitying me. For the first time in my life in that house, they were seeing me. I stepped out into the cool, clean night air, the sound of the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me. It was a sound of finality, like the closing of a casket or the final page of a long, painful book. I didn't look back. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb, the rearview mirror blessedly empty of anything I ever wanted to see again. And I felt light. The $6 million weight of their potential acceptance, a burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying, was gone. In its place was a profound, quiet, and deeply satisfying peace. Back inside the house, as I later heard, the carefully constructed facade of the Harper family imploded. The moment the door closed behind me, the shockwave hit. The party wasn't just over. It was annihilated. Guests began to flee, mumbling awkward excuses, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and awe. They couldn't get out of there fast enough, escaping the suffocating atmosphere of humiliation as if it were a contagious disease. James was the first to explode. He turned on Robert, his face a mask of purple, vein-popping rage. "You idiot!" he screamed, his voice cracking with fury, all pretense of the golden sun gone. "You senile, arrogant, pompous old fool. $6 million. Do you have any idea what we could have done with that money? And you threw it all away for what? To make a speech? To feel like a big man for 5 minutes?" Ellen, my mother, finally broke. She started weeping, not the soft, manipulative tears from the phone call, but harsh, ugly, gasping sobs of pure despair. "Robert, how could you?" she wailed. "How could you be so cruel, so stupid?" But her tears, I knew, weren't for me. They weren't for the son who had been humiliated. They were for the lost villa, the lost fortune, the lost status. They were crying for the life they had held in their hands for a fleeting moment, only to watch it turn to dust. The most vivid account, of course, came from my Aunt Margaret, Robert's older sister. She was the only member of that family who had ever shown me an ounce of consistent, genuine kindness. She had looked at me, not as an outsider, but as her nephew. She called me a few days after the party. "Graham," she said, her voice heavy with the exhaustion of it all, "I just wanted to call and say, I am so proud of you." "Thank you, Aunt Margaret," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "That means more than you know." What happened after I left?" She let out a long, weary sigh. "It was ugly, honey. The ugliest thing I've ever seen in this family, and that's saying something. James and your father almost came to blows. James called Robert things I can't repeat. He blamed him for everything. Robert, of course, blamed you, called you manipulative, cruel. Ellen just sat there on the sofa, crying into her hands, rocking back and forth like a madwoman. The family you left behind that night, it doesn't exist anymore. You didn't just walk out the door, Graham. You held up a mirror, and they shattered into 1,000 pieces. She told me the final, pathetic image of the party, a scene that will be forever etched in my mind. After all the guests had fled, after James had stormed out of the house, swearing he would never speak to his father again, Robert, the great patriarch, the man who had called me a failure, was on his hands and knees on the expensive Persian rug. He was slowly, obsessively, picking up the glossy, ripped pages of the Santa Barbara Villa brochure I had dropped on the table. He was trying to smooth out the wrinkles, to piece together the dream he had just personally, publicly, and irrevocably demolished. He was a king surveying the ruins of a kingdom he himself had burned to the ground. Within the year it was all gone. The house had to be sold. As it turned out, Robert's finances weren't as robust as his ego. He had to bail James out of a series of disastrous business ventures. They downsized to a small, nondescript condo in a retirement community. The empire was gone. The foundation I had created, however, was just beginning to be built. A year can change everything, can feel like a lifetime. 12 months after that disastrous birthday party, I was standing on a different patch of grass, under a much brighter, more hopeful sun. I was in a formerly neglected neighborhood in East Austin, at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the very first OptiNRG house. It was a state-of-the-art residential and learning center, a safe haven for teenagers who were aging out of the Texas foster care system. The $6 million my father had so arrogantly thrown away had been transmuted into this. A beautiful, modern building filled with light, laughter, and the palpable thrum of second chances. I was standing next to Carlos, watching a group of teenagers play a chaotic game of basketball on a brand-new, brightly painted court. They were kids who had been told, in 1,000 different ways, that they were unwanted, that they were difficult, that they were failures. But here they had a home. They had access to tutors, to mental health professionals, to mentors who were teaching them everything from how to cook a meal to how to code a website. Most importantly, they had a community that believed in them, fiercely and unconditionally. "Look at that," Carlos said, clapping me on the back, his voice thick with emotion. "You did that, man. That's all you." I smiled, a real, easy smile that reached my eyes. "No," I corrected him. "We did. I wasn't the same person I was a year ago. I felt like I had shed a skin, a heavy, ill-fitting one I had been wearing my whole life. The angry, hurt part of me, the part that was constantly, subconsciously seeking their validation, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, solid sense of purpose that was deeper and more profoundly satisfying than any parental approval could ever be. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong anymore. I was too busy, too engaged, in the difficult, rewarding work of trying to make things right for kids who were walking the same lonely, treacherous path I had. As the ceremony wound down and people started munching on cookies and drinking lemonade, I saw a familiar figure approaching. It was my Aunt Margaret. She looked older than I remembered, her face etched with a sadness that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in her eyes. "Hello, Graham," she said, pulling me into a warm, strong hug. She looked around at the bustling life of the center. "This place, it's just wonderful. It's the best kind of revenge." "It's not revenge, Aunt Margaret," I said softly. "It's a beginning." "You're right," she said, her eyes welling up slightly. "How are you, honey?" "Really? I'm good," I said. And the amazing thing was I meant it. "I'm really good. How are you?" "I'm all right," she said, though her voice told a different story. "I came to tell you, your father had to sell the house. It's done. James got himself into some trouble with bad investments, some get-rich-quick scheme. Robert had to liquidate most of his retirement savings to bail him out. They live in a small condo over in Arlington now." I just nodded, feeling a strange and complete lack of emotion. There was no surge of satisfaction, no flicker of pity, just nothing. It was like hearing a news story about strangers in a distant city. Their lives and their choices had nothing to do with me anymore. They don't speak, Margaret continued, her voice quiet. James and your father. The fight that started that night. It never ended. It just festered. It broke something for good between them. Robert sits and watches television all day. Ellen. She just seems lost. She hesitated for a moment, then looked at me, a question in her eyes. Your father, he's a proud, foolish, broken man. But he knows what he lost. I went over there last month, and he was on his computer. I saw what was on the screen. It was the Erupted Foundation website. He was reading every article, looking at all the pictures. He'll never admit it, not in a million years. But he knows. I appreciated her telling me. I knew it was her way of offering some kind of closure. But it didn't change anything. His silent, regretful Googling couldn't stitch together the wounds of a lifetime. Then, she reached into her purse and handed me a sealed envelope. This came to my house last week. It's addressed to you. I think you should read it. My name was on the front, in the neat, slightly slanted handwriting I recognized instantly. It was from Lily. I waited until I was back in my office later that day, sitting in the quiet, watching the sun set over the city, to open it. The letter was short, just a single page. Graham, I've started this letter 100 times. I know that I'm sorry isn't enough. It will never be enough. For my entire life, I was a coward. I stood by and watched them hurt you, and I never said a single word. I was so afraid of losing my own small, precarious place at the table that I forgot what was right. I was weak, and I'm so sorry for that weakness. What you did at the party, it was like you opened a door in a prison I didn't even know I was in. You walked out with such strength, such dignity. And for the first time, I realized that the door was there for me, too. I moved out 2 months ago. I have my own tiny apartment, a job at a local bookstore. It's not much, but it's mine. I enrolled in classes at the community college. I'm trying to build a life, a real life, away from all that poison. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that you didn't just save yourself that night. In a strange, indirect way, you saved me, too. Your sister, Lily. I carefully folded the letter and put it on my desk. And I felt something I hadn't expected. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was a flicker of something warm, something akin to hope. My actions had created more than just a foundation of bricks and mortar. They had inadvertently given my sister, the other victim in that house, the courage to build her own life. It was an unintended consequence. A small, beautiful ripple of good in a sea of bad memories. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a form of closure I never knew I needed. I find myself at the Erupted house a lot these days. It's become my touchstone, my true north. I don't go for board meetings or donor events. I just go to be there. I'll sit on a bench in the courtyard and watch the kids. I listen to their stories. I see their struggles, their incredible, stubborn triumphs. I see the kid I used to be in the eyes of so many of them. The other day, a 17-year-old named Maya sat down next to me. She's a fiercely talented artist who draws these incredible, futuristic cityscapes. She's shy but has a core of steel. She wants to go to school for graphic design. You know, she said, looking at the bustling building. Before I came here, I really thought my life was basically over. The day I turned 18, I was going to be on the street with a trash bag of my stuff. I figured I was just nothing, a statistic. The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. Nothing. The same word my father had used as a final judgment, a life sentence. You're not nothing, Maya, I said, my voice thicker than I expected. You are not a statistic. You're everything. You just have to build it yourself. No one's going to hand it to you. She looked at me, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her face. Yeah, I'm starting to get that. As I drove home that evening, the setting sun painting the Austin skyline in hues of orange and purple, it all clicked into place with a profound and peaceful clarity. For so long, my entire life had been a reaction to them. My drive, my ambition, my relentless pursuit of success. It was all, on some level, a desperate attempt to be seen, to be approved of, to be loved by people who were fundamentally incapable of it. I thought that success, that a grand $6 million gesture, would finally buy me a seat at their table. But I was wrong. My goal was never really about getting a seat at their table. It was about realizing I had the power to build my own. A bigger table. A better table. A stronger table. A table where everyone is welcome, where your worth isn't determined by your bloodline or the circumstances of your birth, but by your character, your resilience, and the kindness you choose to show to others. My father's legacy is a broken family, a small condo filled with the ghosts of regret, and a son who no longer bears his name. My legacy is that building full of light and noise and hope. It's the sound of Maya's sketchbook pages turning. It's the future of hundreds, maybe thousands, of kids who will now get the chance they deserved all along. Family, I've finally learned, isn't about the people who are forced to take you in. It's about the people who choose to lift you up. It's my Aunt Margaret, who always chose kindness in a house devoid of it. It's Carlos, my brother, in every single way that truly matters. It's even Lily, out there finding her own strength. And it's every single kid who walks through the doors of that foundation. That's my family. That's my home. And for the first time in my entire life, standing on my own 2 feet, surrounded by a legacy of my own making, I feel completely and utterly whole. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to find your own worth? I'd be honored to read your experiences. Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content that I hope will connect with you.